Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn and my channel is Making with Marilyn. Now on my channel I usually do something crafty, and on today's video I'm going to make a rhinestone shirt for Mother's Day. Now this is going to be a fairly basic shirt, but there is one design element that I've never used in my designs before, and that is an animal print. Now what I'll use on this is first and foremost a shirt. And then I'm going to use 2 colors of rhinestones, and I get my rhinestones from the baby's booty. Now for this shirt, I'm going to use jet black and I'm going to use crystal. And these are 2 basic colors that if you're going to work with rhinestones, you probably ought to have some of these in your rhinestone arsenal. Now the rhinestones that I'm going to use today, they are size SS10 and they're hot fix. And hot fix means they go on things like fabric. You can put them on some other things, but basically they go on fabric. And I'll talk more about the stones when we get to that part. Okay, so to get the stones onto the shirt, first of all, I'm going to use my Cricut Maker and I'm going to cut a rhinestone template out of this flock. Now I get this from Heat Transfer Warehouse. I also get my rhinestone transfer tape to them. I also have a lint roller, that way I can just clean my shirt. I have a Teflon sheet, and I'm going to use it for something other than maybe what you expect. I'll show you that. This is just a paint trim brush. I'll use that to brush my rhinestones into my template. I have a braying tool. This is a rhinestone picker tool. If I have any holes in my rhinestone template and I need to put individual rhinestones in, I can use this to pick one up, place it in, or I can pick up any that are upside down and flip those over. I may not need tweezers, but I have them if I need it. I'm just going to use this ruler to cut my rhinestone flock. I'll also use a rotary blade, which I don't see here. Once I cut my template out, I like to store them on these flexible chopping mats. Then of course I have to use a cutting mat, and then I'm going to use some masking tape. Again, I'll show you why later. Alright, here's the rotary tool I'll use. So before I start cutting my rhinestone flock to get it ready, let's jump over to the computer. I want to show you how I take this design into Cricut Design Space. Now I'm going to go ahead and open Cricut Design Space. I'm going to go ahead and click on New Project. Now I haven't brought my design in yet, so I'll click right here on Upload, Upload Image, and then I could either go find the file, or I see it over here on my desktop, I'll just drag it right on over. Now this is the image, and here's that animal print I was talking about. Right here you see the image name. Let me scroll on over and show you. I like to always put the size of the design while it's still grouped in the file name. So once we get into Cricut, this is what it should be. If it's not this size, 11.488 inches wide by 4.480 inches tall, then I'll resize it to this correct size. Now also you see here it says 10SS. Some people call them 10SS, some people call them SS10s. Either way is fine. But that shows you the size of the rhinestones that this design was made for. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and say Upload. And then I will click on the image and I'll say Add to Canvas. Alright, so that came in at 11.474 inches wide. That's close, but it's not quite right. It was supposed to be 11.488 inches wide. I always like to make sure these numbers match exactly my dimensions. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the 7.4 and replace it with 8.8. It was supposed to be 11.488 inches wide. Now when I hit return, this right here should change to 4.480. So let's see if it does. Okay, it did. Let's go ahead and move this up where we can see it just a little bit better. If I were to click Make It Now, it would prompt me to cut this on 2 different mats because it's in 2 layers. One for the purple layer, one for the green layer. I want to just cut them on the same mat. So what I need to do is ungroup those. I'll click right here. And then I can see this is the green layer, so I'll click on this layer. And then I'll just drag it down, and to conserve flock, I'll put it right under the M. Now, so that the Cricut cuts them just like this, I need to go ahead and select both layers, go to Attach. Now they're going to cut on one piece of flock. Now, the fact that they're both green really doesn't matter. What matters is what color of stones you put in the holes. So we'll click on Make It. Okay, so it went a little bit wider than 11.5, and so it wanted me to cut on a larger mat. Here's what I need to do. I just need to detach those and move this one over just a bit. It's just that these holes right here were sticking too far to the left. So let's go back, click Attach, and that should be fixed. So I'll say Make It. And now it's letting me cut on just a regular mat. Now my design was a little over 9 inches tall. I'm going to go ahead and move it down so that when I cut my flock, and it'll be 12 inches wide, but I'll cut it at about 10 inches tall, I'll have a little bit of flock left up here and a little bit down here. Now after this cuts, I'm going to go ahead and cut the excess flock off here. I don't want to waste that, and I'll put that right back on the backing. I can use it on another project. All right, I'll say Continue. And then I want to find my cut setting. I'm going to say Browse Materials, and then I've set up some cut settings for Rhinestone flock. I like to cut without the white backing on. I'll show you that here when we put the flock on the cutting mat. My cut setting for that is 340 pressure, 1 cut, and fine point blade. Now that may or may not be the right setting for you. What I would recommend is do some small test cuts. Just do some small circles. Start with maybe that setting, maybe something that you've seen another YouTuber talk about. But start with a setting, do some small sample cuts. If it works great, then save that as your Rhinestone flock cut setting. All right, go ahead and click on that and I'll say Done. So we're going to go back over to the table and cut that flock, get it on the cutting mat, then we'll watch this cut. Now the way I like to cut my flock is to have a cutting mat, a rotary cutter, and a ruler. I like this one because it has this cork on the bottom and it keeps it from sliding as easily. So I just put my flock so that it's over here at the 0-inch line, so right down here, and then I make sure that it's straight along this bottom line. Remember, we were going to have this about 10 inches, and so let's give it just a little bit of extra room. I'll make sure that's fairly straight. Then I have my rotary cutter. Now my daughter got me this for Christmas. It was off of Amazon and I love it. I had an old one for a long time, many, many years, and it just wasn't working right anymore. So I picked this one out and she got it for me. Now, if you saw me there, I like to move this part away before I lift the roller because a lot of the times you might have little parts that are still attached. If you pick up your ruler, you have to figure out how to put it back down right. If you try to pull on this and it doesn't pull away, just try to cut it again. So I talked a minute ago about the backing. This white backing is what comes shipped on this. Some people will just put this on their Cricut mat and they'll cut it like that. And some people have great success with that. The upside to that is you don't have to clean all these flock dots off your cutting mat. I have not mastered that yet, and so I still do it taking the backing off. Now when you take the backing off, your mat doesn't need to be very sticky at all because the back of this flock is very sticky. Now I'm not going to throw that away because remember, I'm going to have some of this flock I cut off and put right back on it. Now here's how I'm going to use this Teflon sheet. I'm going to cover most of my mat with it, and then I'm going to go ahead and put this up at the top and try to get it really nice and straight. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'll make sure that is adhered down really well. Then I can just pull this flock back toward my brain tool. And then once I'm off the Teflon sheet, I'll pull it out. Now the reason I'm doing this is because when I started doing rhinestones, oftentimes I would have air pockets under my flock. And sometimes it cut okay, and sometimes it just didn't. I want to make sure this is adhered to the mat and not have air pockets. So now I just use my brain tool, and as I lay it down, I go ahead and roll it with the brain tool. When I do it like this, I don't have those air pockets, and I tend to get really good cuts. All right, that's all there is to it. So let's go put this in the Cricut Maker. All right, it's always exciting to see how well your cut did. So let's go ahead and start lifting this off. Okay, that looks good. Now, when I do this, I don't want to stretch this too much because you can stretch those circles into ovals. And even if they don't become ovals, if you're doing a two-part design, so you have two layers, if you stretch one more than the other, they don't fit together right. So I want to just go around the outside edge, start lifting it up. Now I've cut pretty close to this, so I don't really want to pull there. Now remember, this is the extra flock. I'm going to save that. And all in all, this is coming up really nicely. I think I saw at least one hole so far that didn't come out. That's not a big deal. Okay, there's a few right there. I'll show you a trick for that. And then I like to get close to the mat when I'm pulling. That way I'm not pulling from way out here and stretching all of this. All right, so there's a decent number of holes that stayed in there. That's probably more than I typically have stay in. But again, it's not a big deal. I can fix that pretty easily. Now this is a trick that I learned from the baby's booty. This was the backing on the flock. This is the shiny side. So this is less sticky, or it's not sticky at all. But this is kind of has a coating on it, so it's slippery. I'm going to flip it over. And then I'm going to lay this down, press it down on that backing. Now since I have this flock I want to keep part of this backing clean. But I pull it up and a lot of those dots will stay in there. Now I could keep doing that, or another way you can get those out is just one by one, pull them out with your fingers. If the cut is good, they come out really nicely. It's just that this is pretty dense material, and sometimes those flock dots are just stuck in there from the pressure, not because they didn't cut through, but because of the pressure that they are pushed up against the sides of the circles. Now, when I first started doing rhinestones, my Cricut Maker at that time was not cutting all the way around. It would have one little piece that was connected on each circle, and that was a real pain. And honestly, I don't even know how it corrected itself. I had tried new blades, I had tried all kinds of things. And so I borrowed a friend's machine. I used it for several months. And then I gave it back to her. I pulled my machine back out, and all of a sudden it worked perfectly. So if you're having issues, just keep trying. Hopefully it resolves itself. All right, so I have a few more to get out right here. And then I think I'm ready to move on. All right, I think I'm done. If not, I will figure that out as I go along. All right, so here's that chopping mat I was talking about, and I get these off of Amazon. Sometimes they're sold out, sometimes they're not. They're very similar to what you can get at the Dollar Tree. Now, the ones that you get at the Dollar Tree, historically, they were smaller than this. I like these larger ones because I tend to do large templates. All right, see a couple of flock dots still in there. But somebody in a chat recently said that now the ones at the Dollar Tree are larger. So I need to go check that out. For me, Amazon is just so convenient. I live in a small town, and so for me to go to a Dollar Tree store, it's not like just running down the street. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put that on my chopping mat. This is how I'll store it. I have room for other templates here, and I want to make sure it's down and smooth. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to go ahead and just tape off right here. So I'll rip off just a short piece of this painter's tape. Now, painter's tape, at least a good brand, this is Scotch brand, painter's tape will not ruin your templates. All I'm doing is making it where when I brush these stones in, they're not going to come down here. But I want that closer to me. There we go. So for the main part of my design, I'm going to use crystal rhinestones. This is a basic rhinestone, but it is gorgeous. It's very bright, very blingy, and it's going to make a nice statement. Now these are size SS10s, and they're hot fix. So hot fix rhinestone has an adhesive on the back. It's dry. To reactivate that so it sticks to your shirt, you put it under a heat source. All right, so you dump a bunch of stones on. I put way too many on. And then with this little paint trim brush, you just start going in circular motions. Now for me, when I put a whole bunch on here, when I put way too many, they tend to brush in better. So I tend to put way too many on here. You're just going to put them back in your rhinestone box or however you store yours. So it really doesn't matter how many you have on here. But I like to have a lot. All right, so once you think you have part of your design full, you can just lightly brush these off. Now I see I have a hole down here. I can either fill it back in like that, or I can use that rhinestone picker tool. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and brush any excess stones off of here. And as you do that, some of those empty holes will fill in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave that open so you can see how I use the picker tool. Now I'm not applying a lot of pressure, mainly the weight of the brush and just a tiny bit of pressure from my hand. So I'm going to do that same thing for the rest of the top part of this template. I'm just going to fast forward it, and then we'll go back. We'll really inspect this design, make sure that all the holes are filled, make sure that no stones are upside down, and we'll try to make sure we don't have any excess stones on top. So here's where this little tool comes in handy. First of all, I want to look at this M. I want to see if I see any extra stones. So I will often get down and my face will be even with the stones. Some people lightly rub over them. I am not good at that. I'm too heavy-handed. Now, other than a stone being missing right there, I think it looks good. So I'll just put one in that hole. Then I'll move on to the heart. Now, immediately I see some missing stones. All right, I think I'm good. So I'm going to clean up these extra stones. Then we're going to move on to the tape. I'll show you how I put that on and transfer it to the shirt. Now here's what I like to use for my hot fix transfer tape. It comes from Heat Transfer Warehouse, and to me this is a very, very good quality product. So I'm just going to separate the top from the bottom. And then I keep the bottom piece because I reuse this multiple times. So I want to be able to put it right back down on the bottom once I've used it today. So I'm barely holding on to the sides and I'm hovering above my design. It's slightly bent in the middle, and when you start putting this down and you touch any of the stones, you just have to commit. Now that looks pretty good, but if any of the stones jump out of place, you can move them over with your nail, or you could use the edge of this or the end of this. But I like to push this down and kind of inspect and make sure that those stones really are in the right place. And I see up here, there's one that's not, and I actually see an extra stone there. So to get that extra stone off, I'm going to go ahead and peel this back and figure out which one it is. All right, I think it's this one here, and it's keeping one of the stones that actually belongs on the design from sticking because it was too thick with that extra stone on top. All right, so lay it right back down, press down on it. This time it should come up just fine. So you want to lift this up slowly in case there's any stones that stay in your flock. That way you lay it back down like I did, push on the top, and then they should come up. Now sometimes when you inspect this from the backside, you see that you have a rhinestone upside down. You can fix that before you press your shirt. I'm just going to look through this and see if I see any extra stones or anything missing. I think that looks good. So now I'm just going to move this tape up and cover up the bottom part of this top design. And then for this part, I'm using jet black. I think the contrast between these two colors will be perfect. Here's a shirt that I'm going to use, and I've already pre-pressed this. So I pressed it for 15 seconds at 350 degrees. Then I folded it in two. This was a trick I've seen Crafting with Delonda do. I found the center seam, I laid it back down, and I pressed it again. That way I know where the center is. Now when I first started doing t-shirts, mainly I was using vinyl. My daughter bought me this, and I used it quite a bit. I tend to just eyeball anymore, but these can come in very handy as well. So you line up the shoulders, then you see where the center is, and then you can also make sure that your design is straight. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this just so I make sure I get this nice and straight. It is from my mother-in-law. Now I have a flock dot sitting on the front of this. I'll remove that here in just a minute. All right, so I'm focusing on the center, and then I can tell it's not straight because this M is on top of the plastic, this M is not. So let's just pull that back up. All right, that looks pretty good. It might slightly be off-centered, barely to the left, but we're going to call that good. You can just use a ruler if you want to make sure that you get it straight, but I did want to show you this option. All right, so hold my transfer down and then just peel it off. Now let's get that little flock dot off. Don't need that on my heat press. And then I'm just going to lift this up, look at it, make sure I think it looks good. Now that's down more than 3 inches, but that's going to be okay. All right, I think that looks perfectly fine. We're going to go with that. Now, I want to show you when I put my shirts on my heat press. This is a pad that I bought and added to my HTB run. I think it's made a big improvement. It's thick, it's dense. To me, it's much better than the pad that came with it. And what I like to do is I like to make sure that this collar is not going to get pressed, because when you add heat to the collar, it tends to kind of change the texture of it. Sometimes it can add a sheen to it. And I have my design far enough down. There's no reason for me to press on the collar. Okay, so from left to right, that's fairly centered. I think it's going to get nice even pressure. My collar's off. So I'm going to go ahead, put this on my HTB rod. I'm going to press this at 350 degrees, and I'll press it for 12 seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and pull this top piece off. I'll put this on the backing and save it. And then I need to piece this part down in there. Now, sometimes when you do this on stretchy fabrics, I don't know if it's the heat from the press or what, but sometimes you have to kind of stretch on your shirt to get it to lay in there just right. So don't be in a hurry for this part. Once you press this on, that's where it's going to stay. And so you want to take your time and put this down exactly where you want it. All right, I think I'm finally done fiddling with this. I'm going to put that under the heat press, do 12 more seconds, then I'll bring the shirt right back over here. All right, I finally have my final product, and it is super cute. Look at that sparkle. I'm going to need to make one of these for myself. Now, thanks so much for joining me today. If you're interested in this template, check out my Etsy shop. I'll put a link to that in the video description as well. And if you want the rhinestones, check out the Baby's Booties store. She does have a buy-in about once a month. And I am so happy with this result. So thanks again for joining me, and until my next video, bye-bye.